Most people are staring at the ceasefire. And the real story, according to this account, sits somewhere else entirely, in unexploded ordnance, in silence from the Pentagon, and in the widening economic shock around the Strait of Hormuz. That is where the pressure point is. The immediate trigger was a statement attributed to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. It said specialized units had located and destroyed 3 American GBU-57 bunker buster bombs in the country's northeast, and that a 4th had been safely disabled in a controlled operation. The timing is what made the claim so volatile. This was said to have happened 3 days after the ceasefire between Iran and the United States had taken effect. The weapon at the center of the claim is not ordinary. The GBU-57, often described as the Pentagon's most powerful non-nuclear bunker buster, weighs roughly 13,600 kilograms and is designed to penetrate up to 60 meters of reinforced concrete before detonation. If that kind of munition lands intact, the battlefield does not just absorb it, it studies it. Iranian media went further than simple recovery. The claim was that Iranian forces neutralized the devices before they could be remotely detonated or recovered, then dissected them. In that version of events, the issue is no longer only tactical damage. It becomes technology transfer by accident. That is where the strategic anxiety begins. If a state believes it now understands the design, composition, and engineering logic of one of Washington's most sensitive, conventional penetrators, the consequences could extend far beyond one strike package. The implication is brutal. An expensive American advantage may have been turned into a blueprint. The cost comparison sharpened the message. The commentary argued that each bomb costs roughly $3 million to produce in the United States, while a local Iranian reproduction could cost well under $100,000. Whether or not that estimate proves correct, the underlying argument is clear. Expensive military asymmetry can collapse when reverse engineering enters the room. There is also a delivery problem. The GBU-57 is not a weapon that can be scattered from any platform. It requires a B-2 Spirit bomber, and that bomber requires a permissive air environment, or at minimum, air superiority. So the bomb is not merely costly, it is tied to a very narrow launch architecture. The same Iranian statement expanded the scale of the claim dramatically. It said teams had also disabled more than 9,000 unexploded bombs and recovered dozens of rockets and missiles allegedly linked to attacks by American F-15, F-16, and F-35 aircraft. If true, that would point to 2 things at once: an intense aerial campaign and a disturbing rate of munition failure. That second point matters. A battlefield seeded with that many unexploded munitions is not just a hazard, it is evidence. It suggests sustained bombardment and major inefficiencies in weapons performance. And it creates a secondary intelligence windfall for whoever controls the ground afterward. Images circulated alongside the claims, and that visual layer gave the narrative weight inside Iran. Western media in this telling either downplayed the scope or reported it only in fragments. The Pentagon, by contrast, was described as maintaining near total silence on the material losses. Then the script moved from battlefield debris to political theater. On the same day the Guard statement circulated, Iranian state television reportedly aired images of a parade in Tabriz, capital of East Azerbaijan province, where Shahed 136 drones were displayed on mobile platforms before civilians and government supporters. The geography was part of the signal. Tabriz is not a random stage. It sits less than 200 kilometers from the Azerbaijani border and about 300 kilometers from Turkey, along a line of projection that touches the Caucasus. And in symbolic terms, placing Shahed drones there said more than a closed military drill ever could. The Shahed 136 has become central to this war's economics. It is a one-way attack drone, low-flying, difficult to intercept, and designed to saturate defenses rather than outclass. them technologically. Its strength is not elegance, its strength is repetition. That is the wider military logic running beneath the parade. A saturation system does not need to be better than a sophisticated air defense network in every category. It only needs to be cheap enough, numerous enough, and persistent enough to force the defender into a losing exchange ratio. The symbolism as presented was simple. Here is where your best bombs fell. Here are our drones, intact and operational. That was the message the event was designed to project. The date sequence added another layer. On April 25th, one day before the Guard's statement, crowds reportedly gathered in the desert site of Tabriz in central eastern Iran to commemorate the failed American hostage rescue mission of the 1980s, referred to in Iranian coverage as Operation Eagle Cloud. In Iranian state framing, the memory was not archival, it was contemporary. That old mission ended in disaster for Washington, with 8 American personnel dead, aircraft destroyed, and a sandstorm turning a rescue plan into humiliation. Iranian media, according to the account, presented the anniversary as a historical mirror, another moment when American technological confidence ran into Iranian resistance and failed to deliver decisive control. Put those pieces together and a single narrative emerges. The destroyed GBU-57s, the Shahed display in Tabriz, the anniversary of America's failed rescue operation. Iranian state outlets reportedly presented them as one story, one sequence, one emotional arc. The domestic layer was folded in as well. The Iranian president, speaking the same day, urged the public to reduce electricity consumption with the phrase distilled to a stark formula. Instead of 10 lights, turn on 2, military endurance and household discipline were merged into one communications strategy. Still, there is a line between claim and confirmation, and that line matters. As of April 28, 2026, the account acknowledged that there was no independent public confirmation of the GBU-57 recovery story. What existed were images that appeared consistent with the claim and a conspicuous absence of rebuttal from Washington. That silence became part of the analysis. No publicly available satellite imagery was said to show the bomb remnants directly, but Iranian outlets had already distributed photographs in parallel. A report cited from NBC News acknowledged that damage to American bases from Iranian attacks was more severe than the Pentagon had publicly admitted. The figures attached to that report were substantial, more than 100 impacts across 11 American bases, with estimated costs above $5 billion if that baseline is accepted. Then the recovered ordnance story stops looking like isolated propaganda and starts fitting into a broader pattern of concealed battlefield costs. From there, the argument widened dramatically. If Iran truly dissected the GBU-57, the commentary suggested a future phase of the war could involve Israeli bunkers being targeted with an Iranian version of the very bomb that united 2 states introduced into the theater that would represent not merely a tactical setback, but a counterintelligence disaster. Then the script pivoted from bombs to energy. Russia, China, and Iran, it argued, had together activated what Secretary of State Marco Rubio himself allegedly described as an economic nuclear weapon, not a literal device, a choke point. That choke point is the Strait of Hormuz. Roughly 1 in 5 barrels of the world's oil moves through that corridor, and the transcript claimed Brent crude had already climbed above $111 per barrel as Iran maintained a de facto blockade from mid-March onward. In that frame, the issue is no longer diplomacy, it is systemic pressure. Tankers, according to the account, have been diverted, delayed, or detained. The world is watching fuel prices rise in real time. This is not abstract geopolitics. When it reaches a gas pump, a fertilizer shipment, or a grocery shelf, Then it becomes domestic economics. At this point, the script described a visible shift in Washington's tone. After Russia and China made clear they would not remain passive while Iran was strangled economically, Donald Trump was portrayed as suddenly softening, speaking of reopening Hormuz and suggesting that Iran needed time to recover internally. The implication was simple. External pressure had altered White House language. China's role is central in that equation. More than 80% of Iran's oil exports, the commentary asserted, go to China. Any attempt to shut that flow is therefore not only an anti-Iran measure, it is a pressure move against Beijing's energy security. The preceding weeks were described as a dangerous escalation. Washington had allegedly activated a naval pressure campaign that intercepted or redirected at least 39 Iranian-linked vessels since talks began on April 13th. Tehran's answer in this narrative was to exploit its geography and close Hormuz. That is the core asymmetry. The United States can sanction, bomb, and block. Iran can raise the price of fuel, insurance, shipping, food, and inflation in multiple continents almost immediately. One side applies military pressure, the other can weaponize passage. Rubio's reported language on Fox News sharpened the point. He was said to have described Iran's use of Hormuz as pressure comparable to a nuclear weapon, economically speaking. The metaphor was revealing because it measured not only danger, but pain. Trump's own public messaging fed the uncertainty. He claimed Iran had informed Washington that it was in a state of collapse and wanted the strait reopened quickly while it resolved internal leadership issues. The commentary treated that statement with deep skepticism, reading it less as reliable reporting and more as narrative management. Behind the rhetoric, 5 negotiating obstacles were identified. First, the nuclear file. And Iran was presented as potentially willing to limit its nuclear program temporarily, but not eliminate it. Israel, by contrast, was framed as demanding full dismantlement, with Washington following that position. Second, enriched uranium. Tehran's stance, as described, was that any enriched stock must remain on Iranian territory as a matter of sovereignty. The opposing demand was for physical transfer or external control, which Iran rejected. Third, Hormuz itself. Iran wanted the American naval blockade lifted before the strait could reopen. Washington's initial position was that there would be no reopening without a broader agreement first. Trump's later comments, however, seemed to hint at a softer line. Fourth, money. Tehran was said to be demanding the release of $20 billion in frozen Iranian assets before serious talks could proceed, plus compensation claims approaching $270 billion for damage sustained in the conflict. Rounded politically, the number was treated as roughly $300 billion in total demands. Fifth, regional influence. Washington and Israel were described as insisting that Iran sever ties with Hezbollah, pull back from its network of allies and proxies, reduce support for Palestine, and effectively disarm its regional strategy in the script's reading. That was a non-starter for Tehran. Another clock was ticking in the background, the war powers framework in the United States. Because the war against Iran had not been authorized by Congress, the 60-day limit on sustained military operations without congressional approval became a legal and political fault line. Starting from February 28th, the timeline pointed directly to late April. That matters because it compresses options. The White House could seek congressional approval, risk constitutional confrontation by continuing without it, or scale down operations and present that as strategic adjustment. In the transcript's interpretation, Trump's public softness toward reopening Hormuz may have reflected that legal pressure as much as battlefield reality. China then moved from passive stakeholder to explicit actor. Beijing called the American blockade illegal and described it as bullying behavior. That was not a routine diplomatic note. It signaled that the triangle of Washington, Tehran, and Beijing had become overtly strategic. Russia completed the pincer. The Iranian foreign minister's meeting with Vladimir Putin was presented as proof that support for Tehran was no longer covert or ambiguous. It was visible, direct, and synchronized with China's position. One more institution entered the picture, the International Maritime Organization. Its Secretary General was quoted as saying there was no legal basis for Iran to impose taxes, tolls, or fees in international waters on paper that undercut any attempt to turn Hormuz into a private toll booth. But the script pushed back with a harder question. Who disrupted the old status quo in the first place? Passage through Hormuz had been relatively stable until war widened in that telling. Legal objections arrived after escalation, not before it. The market response became the next battlefield. Brent crude was described as rising more than 3% in a single session and pushing above $111 per barrel. The point was not simply that prices were high, and the point was that the old assumptions about supply security were breaking in public. Natural gas shipping, rail alternatives, and rerouted energy corridors were folded into the analysis. Limited flows resumed for some vessels. Iranian energy was also said to be moving north by rail toward the Caspian, then onward under conditions heavily shaped by Russian control. In other words, the blockade did not stop all energy movements. It reordered it.